So I have a very theological question for you, if you will. And maybe
Mm,
you want to answer it or don't want to answer it. I don't know, because I
okay.
have no idea if you address this in the course even. So just so our listeners here, I haven't thought of any of these questions. We're just having a conversation here. And I thought this would be fun to just
Yeah.
really ask random questions to Mati, who's just done all this work on this course. So can Yahweh be equated with wisdom? Does he have wisdom? Is it separate from him? What does the Hebrew Bible really present to us? What do you think? And how does
Um,
Torah play in that, I guess I would say.
yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I've thought to that level of theological, like, is he wisdom? Does he have his wisdom? I don't know if I even spend much time thinking in that way, just generally
Mm.
speaking, the idea of the attributes of God, right?
Does the Hebrew Bible even want us thinking in that way, I guess my
You know what I
question.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. And this goes back almost to our categories topic a
Yeah.
bit, right? Where there are modes of searching and knowledge and categorization that different cultures or times apply. And so, yeah, I don't naturally think that way. I think many people would want to go to Proverbs 8 um, most immediately for that sort of thing. There's some interesting verbiage there when wisdom speaks about how God acquired wisdom at the beginning of his work. But the interesting that word for acquire is the Hebrew word kana, kuf, uh, kuf nun hey. And this is a Semitic root that's also attested in Ugaritic literature that can also refer to stories where someone begets a child. And so we see that in some Ugaritic literature as well as some of the Hebrew text. So that's kind of a debated verse about how we are to interpret that exactly. But even if you figure out the right nuance for kana, again, like what's Proverbs 8 doing? How are we to understand this? It's very interesting to see wisdom personified in Proverbs. In fact, I think one of the problems of Proverbs 1 through 9 on a popular level is so many people just want to gravitate to that chapter and that chapter alone instead of realizing that wisdom speaks many times in chapters 1 through 9. There's a reason for why she does what she does at different moments. At the very least, what I would say is this. I think what is very, very clear um, is when the Hebrew Bible talks about the Messiah is depicted as one who acts with true wisdom,
Mm.
and that the way that the Messiah acts is an ultimate display of wisdom.
Mm.
That is for sure true. And it also Hebrew Bible depicts that true wisdom comes from God. He is the ultimate source of wisdom, and also that one of the best ways to live wisely is to act as similar to act like God. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 3, um, Proverbs 1 through 9 gives kind of this bifold definition of wisdom. And there's a chapter that goes into some more specific directives that are really interesting. And the very first one actually says, Chesed ve'emet al yazvucha. May chesed and emet not
Mm.
forsake you.
Yeah.
And chesed and emet, as we've talked about in this podcast before, are very important words. These
Very
are words
important.
that God uses in his self description of himself. So this is very important vocabulary. Chesed, very loaded term. Covenant loyalty.
Yeah.
Emet, a word like faithfulness or truth. And these are attributes of God.
Yeah.
And some of the first directives of Proverbs is these should be your most defining attributes. So in a way, we are called to be like God in
Mm.
that sort of sense.
It's
So I
amazing,
think,
right? Because in
yeah,
John's gospel, John chapter 1, they'll say John, the writer, will do the same with Jesus, Yeshua, right? That he is full of grace and truth, or chesed met in that sense. So continue on that. That's such a great point there.
yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting connection. So yeah, I don't know how to respond. Again, like I'm not, my training is not in like as a theologian type thinker in that
Sure.
way. But I guess again, what I would say is if people want to see wisdom on display, see what God does. Um, see what the Messiah does.
Mm.
That's in a sense the ultimate way to see wisdom on display.
So
What
that's
has
good.
God done?
So that takes wisdom sort of out of maybe out of a category that we tend to put wisdom in sort of our Western philosophical mindset, and places it more in a practical sense, especially with regard to actions. And I like that idea. Maimonides said something similar about Exodus 34 and the attributes of God, that they aren't really attributes, rather they are a reflection upon God's actions in that sense.
Mm,
And so that's actually really, I mean, it's really interesting that God, we say he is full of chesed ve'emet because of his
Yeah.
actions that we look at, and we can see it that way. So that too would be very important, I think, for thinking or for reflecting back upon the creation itself, since we are looking at God's acts of creation.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that actually, because one of the pieces of wisdom we gain from the book of Psalms is some of the way that wisdom vocabulary is used in the book of Psalms is in chapters that are about reflecting and meditating on and retelling what
Mm,
God has done.
yeah, I like that.
And some of that is creation, some
Mm,
of that is redemption, some of that is reflecting on God's covenant faithfulness in spite of Israel's unfaithfulness, all kinds of actions, right? But what some of the book of Psalms is doing, it's retelling and recasting some of Israel's stories or some of the stories of the world and of people, and then seeing how God acts. And there are certain chapters of the book of Psalms that make it very clear that a wise person, they, I'm trying to remember I go over this in the video course. I don't like one of the English translate. The English translation I use as my standard, just kind of like reference thing. They use an interesting word that I think is kind of weak. It's not very strong because it's the Hebrew word shamar, that a wise person shamars these things, right? They guard these things, they keep these things. Shamar is what you do to the commands of God. It's what one version of the Ten Commandments, what you do for the Sabbath, for example. And a wise person shamars over the things that God has done in the past.
mm,
And that is something that you keep in front of you. And in a way, the past becomes a window for how we view things in the future. Not in like a weird sense, but it's like that's an act of wisdom, is thinking about what God has actually done and what that means about who we are, who He is, and should inspire us in who we are and what we ought to do. And so some of the Psalms are more focused about, Lord, forgive us for we have sinned. And they go through the story, not only we have sinned, but our fathers have sinned,
yeah.
and goes through the story of how Israel had forgotten the Lord, right? He saves them, but they forget again. And the idea is that someone who is wise, they catch on to this and realize, no, I'm going to be self aware of my sin, God, and I'm going to bring that before you in true, honest confession and trying to live more according to your ways.
Mm. Oh, that's good. I like that.